Hey there, Night Owl. Welcome back. Or maybe welcome in, if this is your first time drifting into one of these long, strange, mildly historical bedtime rambles. So dim the lights, grab your favorite blanket, maybe a cup of something warm, and let's go somewhere dusty. Tonight, we're heading to the Wild West. And no, not the glamorous, gunslinging Clint Eastwood version. We're talking about the real 1800s American West. The place where everything wanted to kill you. The land, the water, the weather, your horse, your food, even your hat if you weren't careful. Basically, a time when people woke up each morning and thought, how can I not die today? So tonight's soft little journey is called Why You Wouldn't Survive a Day in the Wild West. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't. But don't worry, you don't actually have to. You just have to listen. Let's start somewhere dry, dusty, and filled with optimism that's about to get crushed. The arrival. Picture it. It's the 1870s. You've just stepped off a creaky wooden wagon after traveling for months across a continent that seems to be made entirely of dirt and disappointment. You're covered in dust, your clothes are basically beige now, and your body is crunchy. You're in some town with a name like Dead Mule Junction or Dry Creek Gulch, and for some reason you still think you're going to start a new life. People back east told you that the West was full of opportunity. They didn't mention it was also full of diseases, bad whiskey, and men named Buckshot Bill who solve arguments with 6 shooters. Oh, and there's no plumbing. None. If you want to wash your face, you'll have to hope there's a stream nearby that hasn't been used as a horse bath. You see, the West wasn't built for comfort. It was built for chaos. And hope. Mostly misplaced hope. The towns that weren't. Let's take a little walk down the street. There's the saloon, of course, because the only thing you could reliably find in every Western town was alcohol and regret. Then you've got the general store, which sells everything from pickled eggs to bullets, sometimes side by side. There's a sheriff's office with one tired man and one rusty gun. And next to it, a building that's somehow both a church and a brothel, depending on the day of the week. Towns like this popped up overnight, literally. A few tents one week, a bar the next, and suddenly, bam, it's a city. No roads, no law, no plan, just dust and dreams. The West was built by people who couldn't quite make it elsewhere. Failed farmers, failed businessmen, failed everything. They all came here hoping the desert wouldn't notice. It always did. Food. The culinary tragedy. Now, let's talk about food, because you're probably thinking, okay, maybe it was tough, but at least they had some hearty meals. Nope. Breakfast in the Wild West was whatever hadn't spoiled. Beans, bacon, or biscuits if you were lucky. Lucky being a strong word for a meal that tasted like salt and desperation. Fresh vegetables were rarer than a polite poker player. If you wanted something green, you'd better hope a tumbleweed blew through at lunchtime. And coffee? It existed, but it was usually made from grounds that had been reused so many times they were basically brown water. You'd pour it, sip it, and wonder if your tongue was melting. Cows were around, sure, but most weren't exactly prime steak material. And if you were a settler without livestock, you might be eating beans for breakfast, beans for lunch, and if you're really splurged, beans again for dinner. It was a high-fiber nightmare.
Water, the silent assassin. You'd think in a place that's mostly desert, people would treat water like liquid gold. And they did, when they could find it. Streams, wells, and rivers were unpredictable, often contaminated, and sometimes just didn't exist. You could walk 10 miles under the burning sun, finally stumble upon a small creek and think, "Finally!" Then you drink from it and instantly regret your life choices. Because that water probably contained more bacteria than a 19th century surgeon's hands. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid were pretty much the top 3 leading causes of death, right up there with being shot by someone named Jed. So, yeah, you probably wouldn't survive a day, mostly because you'd try to drink water. Hygiene, the concept that didn't exist. If you were born in the 1800s, chances are you smelled like old boots. And if you moved west, that was considered good hygiene. Bathing was optional and rare, because hauling water, heating it, and finding privacy in a one-room shack was a lot of effort. People might bathe once every few weeks, or even less. Soap existed, but it was basically lye mixed with fat, the kind of stuff that would strip paint off a fence. So people often skipped it entirely. Deodorant? Nope. Toothpaste? Maybe baking soda if you were fancy. Toothbrushes were, let's just say, aspirational. And dentistry was performed by blacksmiths half the time. So if you survived the cholera and the dehydration, you'd probably lose all your teeth by 30. Romantic, right?
The wildlife situation. The West was full of things that could kill you. Snakes, scorpions, mountain lions, bears, even cute little prairie dogs carried diseases that could ruin your week. Rattlesnakes were the big ones. You'd be walking through the scrub, minding your business, and suddenly, rattle. If you were lucky, you'd hear it before you stepped too close. If you weren't, well, you'd get to experience 19th century medical care, which was mostly just whiskey and panic. Then there were the mosquitoes, endless, buzzing clouds of them. And if the bites didn't get you, the malaria probably would. Basically, if it crawled, flew, or slithered, it wanted to bite you. And it usually succeeded. Medicine, or how not to help. Okay, let's say you actually do get sick or injured. You might think, surely there were doctors. And there were, just not good ones. Most frontier doctors were self-taught or had attended a few weeks of something loosely described as medical school. They carried bags full of tools that looked suspiciously like torture devices. Anesthesia? Rare. Sterilization? Theoretical. So if you broke a leg, you were getting it sawed off. Awake. If you had a fever, they might bleed you out, because apparently the cure for losing strength was losing more strength. And remember, this is before antibiotics, so even a tiny cut could turn into a death sentence. Basically, the best medical advice in the Wild West was, don't get hurt. Fashion, because chafing builds character. You've probably seen Western movies, the long coats, the leather boots, the wide-brimmed hats. Looks cool, right? Now, imagine wearing that in 110-degree heat every single day. People dressed like they were allergic to comfort. Men wore wool trousers and vests in the desert. Women wore layers of corsets and petticoats, which, by the way, made going to the bathroom a logistical nightmare. Laundry was rare, so clothes were usually stiff, dusty, and smelt faintly of horses. And if you wanted new clothes, you either sewed them yourself or waited 3 months for a wagon delivery from St. Louis. Amazon Prime, it was not. Entertainment, the original boredom. So what did people do for fun? Well, not much.
There were saloons, where men played cards, drank terrible whiskey, and occasionally shot each other. There were traveling shows, maybe a fiddler or a preacher who could also juggle. And if you were lucky, there was a dance once a month, where everyone smelled bad, but the lighting was too dim to care. Reading was a luxury. Books were rare, and newspapers took weeks to arrive. So gossip became the main entertainment. And since there were about 12 people in town, everyone already knew all the gossip. So mostly, people just sat on porches, watched the horizon, and waited for something, anything, to happen. Law and disorder. Now, let's say you survive the hunger, thirst, and boredom. There's still one more thing waiting for you: other people. Law enforcement was minimal. Sheriffs were often elected based on who had the biggest mustache or loudest voice. Towns had one jail cell, usually occupied by the local drunk. If someone stole your horse, you had two choices: hunt them down yourself or lose your horse forever. Justice was improvised. Sometimes a jury, sometimes a lynch mob, sometimes just one angry guy with a shotgun who decided today was Justice Day. Basically, if you weren't careful, the West would kill you or your neighbor would. Climate, nature's middle finger. And we haven't even talked about the weather yet, because if the people didn't kill you, nature probably would. The West had two settings: too hot and frozen misery. In the summer, you'd bake alive. In the winter, your eyelashes froze shut. Dust storms could bury entire wagons. Flash floods came out of nowhere. And tornadoes, well, let's just say, if you saw one, you didn't outrun it. Settlers built houses out of sod, which is basically dirt stacked on dirt. When it rained, your house leaked. When it was windy, your house disintegrated. Cozy. The myth versus the mud. So where did the romantic image of the Wild West come from? Mostly dime novels, the 19th century version of clickbait. Writers in New York made up stories about brave cowboys, noble sheriffs, and glittering gold towns. In reality, most people were dirty, poor, and deeply uncomfortable. The average cowboy earned about $1 a day and spent most of it on whiskey. The gold rush? Yeah, 99% of miners never found anything. Most just found back pain. The so-called frontier spirit was really just stubbornness with branding. Let's take a slow breath here, because we've wandered through the dust, the hunger, the diseases, and the bad coffee. And you've survived, in theory. But remember, we're only just getting started. In the next part, we'll meet the people who somehow thrived out here: outlaws, sheriffs, madams, and the occasional snake oil salesman who could charm an entire town out of their last dollar. So let's drift over, quietly, to that side of the story. The humans of the Wild West, and all the beautifully broken things they did to survive it.
Hey again, still awake? That's okay if you are, and okay if you're not. This part's slower, dustier, and full of people who, honestly, probably needed naps themselves. So let's drift back into the West, that strange in-between world of law and chaos, where everyone claimed to be making a living, but most were just making bad decisions. Tonight, we'll meet the outlaws who couldn't follow rules, the sheriffs who barely enforced them, and the smooth-talking salesman who could convince a dying man to buy miracle hair tonic, which, by the way, usually contained
turpentine. Let's mosey on slowly. The Outlaws, America's first influencers. If you ever thought crime doesn't pay, well, it didn't in the West either, but it made you famous. The frontier was full of people who thought rules were more of a suggestion. Men like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Butch Cassidy. Names that sound cool now, but back then mostly meant armed and unpredictable. Let's start with Jesse James. Born in Missouri in 1847 because, of course he was, Jesse grew up during the Civil War, which was the perfect environment for a boy with an excess of confidence and a shortage of adult supervision. He started as a Confederate guerrilla. Then, when peace came, he decided, nah, I liked shooting people. So he kept going. Jesse and his brother Frank formed the James Younger Gang, a group of very enthusiastic, very incompetent bank robbers. They robbed trains, stagecoaches, and banks, basically anything with a door and money behind it. Sometimes they even killed people, but other times they just yelled a lot and ran away. The newspapers, desperate for excitement, turned Jesse into a celebrity. He was the Robin Hood of the West, they said. Except he didn't actually give anything to the poor. He mostly just kept it. But sure, let's go with folk hero. Jesse was finally shot in the back by one of his own gang members, Robert Ford, while adjusting a picture on the wall. Very dignified. He died instantly, leaving behind a legend that was at least 60% fiction and 40% bad luck. Billy the Kid, the original problem child. Real name, Henry McCarty. Or maybe William Bonney? Nobody really knew because record-keeping was not the Wild West's strong suit. Billy's childhood was basically a series of unfortunate events. Orphaned young, bounced between jobs, and eventually started stealing horses because that's what counted as a career move. He became famous during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, which sounds like a real war, but was actually a bunch of angry ranchers shooting at each other over store credit. Billy reportedly killed at least 8 people, though given the West's habit of exaggeration, it was probably more like 2.5. Still, that was enough to make him infamous. He escaped jail multiple times, flirted with outlaw stardom, and even developed a weirdly loyal fan base. And then Sheriff Pat Garrett, who had once been his drinking buddy, tracked him down and shot him dead in a dark room. Billy was 21. He died young, but not before inspiring decades of ballads, dime novels, and one particularly disappointing movie adaptation. If there's a lesson here, it's probably don't become friends with sheriffs. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the polite bandits. Some outlaws were surprisingly civil. Butch Cassidy and his partner, the Sundance Kid, were known for their politeness. They'd rob a train and then apologize to the passengers. Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. Please enjoy your day. They even returned money once when they realized they'd robbed the wrong person, which, in the world of outlaw ethics, was basically sainthood. Their gang, the Wild Bunch, pulled off several impressive heists before eventually fleeing to South America, where they probably died in a shootout. Or maybe they didn't. The reports were fuzzy, because of course they were. The legend says they went out in a blaze of glory. Reality probably says they went out broke and sunburned. But we'll let the legend win this time. It's nicer that way. Sheriffs and the art of doing almost nothing. Now let's look at the other side, the lawmen, the ones who were supposed to bring order to the Wild West. Spoiler, they didn't. The problem was being a sheriff wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting, thankless, and usually paid less than the bartender job at the saloon. Many sheriffs were elected, which meant they were more concerned about being liked than being effective. Imagine trying to arrest a guy who might also be voting for you next month. Awkward. The most famous lawman of them all was probably Wyatt Earp. And depending on who you ask, he was either a noble defender of justice or just another guy who liked shooting people and writing his own press releases. Wyatt Earp drifted from town to town, taking on jobs as a gambler, bouncer, and part-time lawman. He's best remembered for the gunfight at the OK Corral, a 30-second shootout that's been stretched into 3 hours of Hollywood drama ever since. The truth? It wasn't really a duel of honor. It was more like 3 angry guys arguing over whether someone's horse was stolen. Then everyone started shooting. Wyatt Earp lived long enough to see himself turned into a legend, and he leaned into it. He moved to Hollywood, consulted on Western films, and told stories so exaggerated that even he probably didn't believe them. He died peacefully, which for the Wild West was practically a miracle. Snake Oil Kings, the traveling hope salesman. Now for my favorite kind of frontier dweller, the con artist. Because the Wild West was a breeding ground for fraud. No regulations, no consumer protection, and plenty of desperate, sick people. Enter the snake oil salesmen. Literally. These were traveling peddlers who roamed from town to town selling miracle tonics. They promised to cure everything: arthritis, baldness, heartbreak, probably your horse too. The secret ingredient? Usually alcohol, morphine, or turpentine. So, yes, it did make you feel better briefly. One of the most famous was Clark Stanley, the Rattlesnake King. He claimed to have learned ancient healing secrets from Hopi medicine men. He'd stand on stage, kill a snake, and pretend to extract oil from it right in front of the audience. It was pure theater, and people loved it. When his snake oil was finally tested decades later, it turned out to contain no snake, just mineral oil, beef fat, and red pepper. A fine recipe for heartburn. But his success inspired thousands of imitators, selling electric liver syrup, Dr. Frawley's brain elixir, and my personal favorite, Carter's little liver pills. They didn't work, but they sold like crazy. Because in a world with no doctors, no medicine, and no hope, hope in a bottle was still better than nothing.
The women who held it all together. Let's pause the outlaw chaos for a second. Because behind every dusty, lawless town, there were women quietly holding everything together. Most Western women didn't wear frilly dresses or carry parasols. They were ranchers, homesteaders, midwives, and sometimes even business owners. They woke up before dawn, milked cows, tended crops, raised children, buried neighbors, and still somehow found time to fix dinner, which was probably beans again. And then there were the saloon girls, not quite the glamorous figures old movies made them out to be. Many were widows or runaways, just trying to survive in a world that gave them few options. Some worked the bar, some danced, some did other things. But all of them were tougher than any cowboy you've ever heard of. There was also a handful of actual female outlaws, like Belle Starr, the so-called bandit queen. She rode with gangs, carried 2 pistols, and wore velvet skirts, because crime doesn't mean you can't have flair. And then Calamity Jane, a sharpshooter, a scout, a drinker, and possibly the only person who could outswear a wagon driver. She claimed to have been Wild Bill Hickok's lover, though that's probably more myth than reality. Still, she spent her life doing what most men couldn't, surviving the West on her own terms. The saloon, the social center of everything. No story of the Wild West is complete without the saloon, Because if there was one building every town had, it was a place to drink, gamble, and complain. Saloons were the heart of frontier life, equal parts bar, hotel, post office, and rumor mill. You could buy a drink, find a card game, and get shot, all before dinner. The whiskey was usually homemade, often from questionable ingredients. It might contain alcohol, kerosene, tobacco juice, and whatever else the bartender had lying around. So yes, it burned, but not in a good way. There were poker games, fist fights, and the occasional impromptu wedding. And in the corner was a dusty piano that hadn't been tuned since the Civil War. If you wanted to meet everyone who mattered in town, for better or worse, you went to the saloon. If you wanted peace and quiet, you left town. The death of the West. By the late 1800s, the Wild West was starting to fade. Railroads connected everything. Telegraphs shrunk distances, and civilization, or at least something like it, began creeping in. The myth of the frontier started to take over before the frontier even ended. Writers, photographers, and showmen like Buffalo Bill turned real hardship into entertainment. He created Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show, a traveling circus of cowboys, fake battles, and romanticized nonsense. People in big cities loved it. They thought it was exciting. They didn't realize it was already history. The real West, the dusty, disease-ridden, uncomfortable one, was quietly dying. Its towns turned into ghost towns, its heroes turned into legends, and its outlaws became bedtime stories. Settling the dust. So, here we are. The lawless days are over, the legends are exaggerated, and the dust has settled. What's left is a reminder that the Wild West wasn't wild because of the gunfights or the gold rush. It was wild because it was raw, because it was human. People went there chasing something: freedom, fortune, redemption, or just space. Most didn't find what they wanted, but somehow their stories linger, passed down, polished up, and retold by tired voices like mine, late at night when the world feels a little quieter. Take a slow breath. Maybe sip your water, hopefully cleaner than a frontier creek, and let yourself imagine those endless plains fading into twilight, the last saloon lamp flickering out, the wind carrying the sound of a piano, out of tune, fading into sleep. We'll wander a little further next time, maybe east, maybe back into another century entirely. But for now, you've survived another day in the Wild West. Something most people back then couldn't say.
Hey, welcome back. If you're still awake, congratulations. You've officially lasted longer than most homesteads in 1870s Nebraska. If you've drifted off and somehow come back halfway through, that's fine too. This is a slow story, the kind that doesn't mind if you forget where you left off. Tonight, we're wrapping up our little journey through the Wild West. We've met the outlaws, the sheriffs, the con men, and the dreamers. Now we'll meet the people who quietly built the place, watched it crumble, and then stayed behind when the rest of the world moved on. Because the Wild West didn't end with a gunfight. It ended with silence, with empty streets, creaky wooden signs, and tumbleweeds that didn't even care enough to stop. Let's drift there, to the last lonely years of the frontier. The women of the West, the real survivors. We talked about some of them earlier, but they deserve more than a mention. Because while the men were out robbing trains and writing their own legends, the women were busy making civilization happen. They were the school teachers, midwives, and laundresses who kept towns from collapsing entirely. They didn't have time for heroics, just survival.
Real, boring, hard survival. A woman on the frontier was expected to do everything: cook, clean, raise kids, plant crops, kill snakes, fix fences, patch roofs, and sometimes fend off the occasional bandit. She was also supposed to remain ladylike, which is a fun challenge when you haven't bathed in a month and there's a raccoon living under your porch. Take, for example, Mary Fields, better known as Stagecoach Mary. Born into slavery, freed after the Civil War, and somehow ended up in Montana running a mail route. She carried a rifle and a revolver, wore men's clothes, and could outdrink most cowboys. The locals adored her. Probably because, if they didn't, she could break them in half. Or Annie Oakley, the famous sharpshooter who could hit a playing card edge-on from 30 paces. She performed in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, the show that turned the whole West into a kind of dream. Audiences loved her, the polite, small woman who could outshoot any man alive. It was charming and slightly terrifying. Then there were the countless nameless women, the ones history forgot. They lived in cabins that leaked, buried children who caught fevers, and wrote letters that took 6 months to arrive. They never robbed a train or shot a sheriff. They just kept everyone alive. And in the end, that's harder. Ghost towns, the places dreams went to die, quietly. Let's talk about what happened after. After the gold rushes ended, after the mines ran dry, after the railroads moved on. Because the Wild West didn't disappear, it just emptied. All those boom towns that had sprung up overnight, they vanished almost as fast. The miners left, the bars closed, and the wind took over. What was left were ghost towns, little wooden skeletons scattered across the desert. You can still find them today. Rows of leaning buildings, their signs half missing. Old saloons with the mirrors cracked and the floors covered in sand. A piano sitting in the corner, its keys yellow and silent. Some still have furniture, beds made of iron, chairs that haven't moved in a century. It's as if everyone just got up one morning and decided to stop trying. Because they did. The West had promised riches. Instead, it delivered exhaustion. And when there was nothing left to dig or sell or hope for, the people drifted away, like the dust itself. The funny thing about ghost towns is that they're oddly peaceful. They're not haunted in the spooky, screaming way. They're haunted in the tired way, the way that old places are when they finally get to rest. Homesteads and the dream that broke people. Let's go back a little, before the ghost towns, to the settlers, the ones who believed that all you needed was a patch of land and a strong back. The Homestead Act of 1862 promised 160 acres of free land to anyone willing to improve it, which sounded great on paper, until you realized the land was basically rock, sand, and tumbleweed. Families traveled thousands of miles for this, by wagon, by rail, by sheer willpower. They built houses out of sod because there were no trees, literally dirt walls. They planted crops that died, drank water that dried up, and waited for rain that didn't come. In the Dakotas, winters froze livestock solid. In Kansas, locusts came in swarms so thick they darkened the sky. They ate the crops, then the laundry, then the wood off the fences, even the curtains. But people stayed, because the only thing worse than living there was admitting failure and going home. That was the cruel beauty of the frontier myth. It convinced people that suffering meant they were doing something noble, that if they just held out a little longer, the land would reward them. It didn't, but they stayed anyway. The railroads, the end of isolation, and in a way, the end of the dream. Trains changed everything. They connected the coasts, carried people, and, most importantly, carried money. Towns that were days apart were suddenly just a few hours away. But with progress came problems. Railroad companies were ruthless. They seized land, displaced communities, and controlled prices like medieval kings with steam engines. They also brought more people, the kind of people who didn't want to dig or fight or die just to build shops and schools and churches. You know, civilization. And slowly, painfully, the Wild West started to look less wild. The guns went quiet, the saloons got cleaner, the sheriffs got bored.
Buffalo Bill and the birth of the myth. But the world wasn't ready to let go. So along came Buffalo Bill Cody, the man who turned history into show business. Bill had been everything: a scout, a hunter, a soldier, and most importantly, a self-promoter. He created Buffalo Bill's Wild West, a massive traveling show that toured the U.S. and Europe. It had real cowboys, fake Indians, staged battles, and occasionally Annie Oakley shooting glass balls out of the sky. People loved it, especially the Europeans, who thought America was basically one giant cowboy movie. Even Queen Victoria reportedly enjoyed it, though it's unclear if she understood what she was watching. The show ran for decades, turning real people into caricatures. Cowboys became noble heroes, Native Americans became props. The whole messy, complicated story of the West was repackaged into something simple: good guys, bad guys, and wide open spaces. It was brilliant marketing and total nonsense, but people believed it. They still do. The native truths. It's impossible to talk about the Wild West without talking about the people who were already there. The indigenous nations who watched the frontier roll over them like a slow-moving storm. For them, the West wasn't wild, it was home, until settlers arrived and decided that home was up for grabs. Treaties were made and broken. Land was promised, then taken. Whole communities were displaced, wiped out, or forced onto reservations where the land was barely livable. Wars broke out. Not that history books called them that. They called them conflicts, which sounds polite, like two neighbors arguing over a fence. But it wasn't polite. It was brutal. Names like Sitting Bull, Geronimo, and Crazy Horse became legend, but the reality was tragedy. They weren't trying to conquer anything. They were trying to keep what was already theirs. By the time the 20th century rolled around, the so-called frontier was closed. The native nations were confined, the settlers had their farms, and the myth of the West had been neatly packaged for export. The real story? Too complex for the postcards. Technology creeps in. Once the railroads came, technology followed. Telegraphs, electricity, eventually telephones. Suddenly, the vast, empty silence of the West was filled with noise. The steady hum of wires, the chug of trains, the sound of progress, rolling in whether people wanted it or not. And of course, the photographers came too. Hauling their heavy cameras, they captured the last days of the frontier. Black and white faces squinting into the sun, unsure whether to smile or scowl. Little towns pretending to be bigger than they were. And landscapes so wide they still make you feel small, even in a photo. Those pictures, quiet, stoic, slightly sad, became the visual memory of a world already vanishing. The last cowboys. By the early 1900s, the cowboy, that icon of the Wild West, was practically extinct. Barbed wire had ended open-range grazing, cattle drives gave way to fenced pastures and rail transport. The West had become efficient, but the cowboy survived in imagination. He became the American hero, rugged, independent, morally upright, and somehow always clean-shaven despite living in the desert. In reality, most cowboys were underpaid ranch hands. Many were Mexican vaqueros or black freedmen who never got the credit they deserved. They worked hard, slept rough, and earned almost nothing. No one wrote songs about them, not until much later. So the myth rode on, even as the men who lived it disappeared. Ghosts of the dream. If you drive through parts of Nevada, Arizona, or Montana today, you can still see what's left. Wooden signs faded by sun and time, a rusty horseshoe nailed to a door frame, a church bell that hadn't rang in 100 years. The Wild West isn't gone. It's just quiet now. And maybe that's fitting, because for all the noise and chaos and gunfire, the real West was about endurance, people trying to make something out of nothing. And when nothing won, they just moved on. You can almost imagine them, the last few settlers, standing on a porch at sunset, watching the sky turn orange over a town that's already half empty. The wind blowing through the broken windows, the sound of a train in the distance, heading somewhere newer, somewhere easier. That was the end of the dream. Not with a bang, just with people getting tired. Closing the map. In 1893, historian Frederick Jackson Turner gave a lecture called The Significance of the Frontier in American History. He declared the frontier closed. Every inch of land had been mapped, claimed, and cataloged. And he said something interesting, that the frontier had shaped the American spirit: individualism, optimism, restlessness. Maybe he was right. Or maybe the frontier just reflected it, the endless, uneasy desire to keep moving, to keep conquering something, even when there's nothing left. The Wild West wasn't a place, it was a mood, a long, dusty fever dream about freedom and the price you pay for it. The long fade. So here we are, a century later, and we still tell these stories. We still make movies about cowboys. We still romanticize the saloon doors, the lonely desert, the man with the hat and the squint. But the truth underneath it all, that quiet exhaustion, that slow, endless struggle, that's what's really haunting. Because the Wild West wasn't just about danger or adventure. It was about loneliness and endurance, and people who looked at an empty horizon and said, maybe this time it'll be different. It never was, but they kept saying it anyway. So as you drift towards sleep, imagine the desert at dusk, a sky so wide it swallows everything, the last campfire flickering out, a few faint stars starting to appear, the world slowing down, the West finally resting. And maybe you too can rest a little, because you've made it through the dust, the heat, the loneliness, and the myths. You've survived a day and a night in the Wild West, something most never could.
Hey again, you're still here. That's impressive. Most people would have already been picked off by dysentery by now, or maybe just the boredom of the desert. But since you've made it this far, let's keep wandering through the dusty streets of the Wild West and talk about the people who claimed they could heal you. Spoiler, they couldn't. Let's start with the frontier doctors, or as some might call them, optimistic amateurs with knives. The West didn't exactly attract the cream of the medical crop. Most real doctors stayed in cities where people actually paid in cash instead of dead rabbits. What the frontier got were the guys who flunked out of medical school or never even got in, but figured, hey, if I can hold a saw, I can probably do surgery. Medical training back then wasn't what you'd call rigorous. Some doctors learned their trade through apprenticeships that lasted a few months. Others simply bought a medical diploma through the mail, which was apparently a thing. You could just send some money to a sketchy university in Philadelphia and voila, you were now Dr. Jeremiah Bonesaw, MD. The result was predictable. If you got shot, stabbed, kicked by a mule, or accidentally bit your own tongue off in a saloon brawl, your best bet was to pray. Anesthesia? Rare. Sterilization? Practically unheard of. The medical tube kit of the average frontier doctor included a bone saw, a bottle of whiskey, and a prayer to whichever deity was in charge of not letting people die too fast. Let's say you were unlucky enough to need an amputation. The doctor would sit you down on the table, probably the same one used for card games an hour ago, hand you a bottle of whiskey, and start cutting. No gloves, no disinfectant, no anesthesia beyond try not to scream too much. And if you survived the shock, infection would often finish the job within a few days. Then there were the snake oil salesmen. The legends are true. These guys traveled from town to town selling bottles of miracle elixir that supposedly cured everything from gout to gunshot wounds. Most were just alcohol, chloroform, or opium in a bottle. To be fair, that combination did make you forget your problems for a while, just not permanently. They'd set up shop in the middle of town, shouting about how their elixir had cured some miner's consumption or made a one-eyed prospector see visions of gold. Sometimes they even hired actors to faint dramatically and then miraculously recover. And the crowd, drunk and desperate, would buy it, literally. Let's not forget about dentistry, because who doesn't love a good tooth story? Frontier dentists, when they existed, were often blacksmiths with pliers. If you had a toothache, you went to the blacksmith, he handed you a swig of whiskey, and then yanked the offending molar out with the same tools he used to fix wagon wheels. Sometimes you leave with an infection, sometimes you leave without half your jaw. It was kind of a gamble. Of course, disease didn't help either. Cholera, smallpox, tuberculosis, typhoid, all those lovely diseases we love to read about were rampant. Hygiene was optional at best. Bathing was a luxury. People bathed maybe once a month, sometimes once a season, and if you were a cowboy, maybe once a year if a river happened to be nearby and you accidentally fell into it. Water wasn't always safe either. Frontier towns often used the same river for drinking, bathing, and, you guessed it, dumping waste. Dysentery outbreaks were so common that going west often meant going into intestinal battle. And if you thought you could just boil the water, good luck finding enough fuel to do it. Speaking of fuel, let's talk about fire. The Wild West was basically a giant tinderbox. Wooden buildings, straw roofs, and open flames everywhere. What could go wrong? Fires tore through towns constantly. One kicked over lantern or drunken candle accident could wipe out an entire settlement overnight. The best part? There were no fire departments. Maybe a bucket brigade if you were lucky. Basically a bunch of panicked people throwing cups of water on a raging inferno. Once your town started burning, all you could really do is save your whiskey and run. Now, if by some miracle you survived the doctors, diseases, and disasters, you still had to worry about the weather. The Great Plains and desert regions of the American West were basically nature's testing ground for human endurance. One day you could be roasting in 110-degree heat, and the next day you'd be buried under a surprise blizzard. Dust storms could roll in out of nowhere, blinding people and burying wagons. Lightning storms? Frequent. Tornadoes? Regular guests. And let's not forget about the flash floods. You could be enjoying a nice calm evening and suddenly find your tent floating down what used to be a dry creek bed. The settlers' houses, often made of sod, wood scraps, or even mud bricks, weren't exactly ideal shelters. If it rained too long, your house could literally start melting. If it was too dry, it could crumble. And if the wind picked up, it might just blow away entirely. Oh, and those lovely outhouses everyone used, let's just say they were a hot spot for all kinds of wildlife. Snakes, scorpions, and rats loved those things. Imagine sitting down and feeling something move under you. The West truly kept you on your toes. So you might be wondering, with all this misery, why do people even come out here? Simple. Hope. Gold, land, and a chance at freedom. The promise of something better. Of course, something better usually turned out to be scurvy and heartbreak, but hope's a stubborn thing. And even after all that, the hunger, the dust, the disease, the questionable whiskey-based medicine, some people stayed. They built homes, towns, and lives, because somehow amidst all the chaos, they found beauty. The endless horizon, the sunsets that made even the most cynical cowboy pause. Let's drift over now to one last side of Western life, the strange social world of saloons, gamblers, and the women who ran the show behind the scenes. Because if you thought the West was rough, the women were living on a different difficulty setting.
And hey, if you're still awake and somehow enjoying this slow tumble through history's dust, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss part 5 when it drifts in, sometime after the next nap.